I thought data analysts were going to, slice and dice the numbers many different ways and tell me lots of stories. But all they ever did was slice and dice the numbers. And then here, it was right after September 11th, head of the private equity firm asked me to lie to the vendors of why we weren't paying them and telling them it was 9/11 related. And I refused. When he let me go, he called me not a team player.
With me today, I have Tom Crooks, a fractional CFO with significant experience in financial analytics, M&A, strategic development, and change management. Tom has been fired 4 times as a CFO because, and I quote, "I'm from New Jersey and have a lack of filter." Tom, how are you today?
Oh, good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm looking forward to this because I believe people usually see CFOs as just number driven, and that's all. And I would like to give a little bit more character to that whole space. So, first of all, tell me, how did you get into being a CFO?
Um, Back when I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor, and I have I think I have a great balance of creative and analytical. My family, my uncle and my brother were both on Wall Street. Numbers came easy to me. I was poor. I didn't feel like I was able to go that acting route because all I heard about was people just being poor and struggling and being waiters and the percentages being very low of success. So I went where I thought I could get out of poverty and just look forward to building something better for myself, just trying to get better. And so I just went into finance. I went from high school. I what are they calling it? They don't call it homeless these days, but I don't know, home challenged. I wasn't doing well. So when I got to college, you could live there. It gave me a home. It gave me a purpose, and I just decided to. It was the first year I think Rutgers had a finance major at their business school, and I decided that that fits my strengths. So I'm going to go with my strengths. Not exactly what I desired to do, but I was pretty good at. So I decided to go with that. And as I took more courses along those lines, I realized that it's kind of like detective work, which I really enjoyed. It's like almost like you look at like auditing, like my son is in forensic accounting, for example. It's like digging down into the numbers and trying to find the story. And so I could equate that back to, things that I did enjoy. It's not just number crunching, as they say. I started down an accounting route, and that I did not like. Nothing against accountants, but for me, it was boring because it was repetitive tasks over and over and over again, at least from what I was learning. So the financial side was more analytical and more like digging down deep into the numbers and trying to find out either what was wrong or looking for opportunities. So that's why I went that route.
When we're talking about the financial side as a forensic kind of component to it, if you're brought in as a fractional CFO in a company, what are some of the first places that you start to look, and what are some of the first clues, let's say, that you're trying to find?
When I go into a new company, I do what we call an assessment, and we look at profit, which is their numbers. People, do you have the right people doing the job? Do they have the right skill sets? Process, so do they actually have documented process, or are they flying by the seat of their pants, or just doing what they've always done or what they've always been taught to do? So is there a monthly close process? Is there a reconciliation process? And then systems, do they have the right systems in place? A lot of companies start with QuickBooks. Have you outgrown QuickBooks? So looking at their systems too, and not only their systems that they have, but the reports that they're getting off of the systems. Do they actually know what reports they can get off of their systems? And that all encompasses having KPIs, which are key performance indicators. So what key performance indicators help you drive the business? So if you're the CEO, what do you want to look at on a daily basis to know how well you're doing and how well each person in your staff is doing that's reporting to you?
this assessment with the four P's like financials, people, success, and systems, do you see one that most businesses don't focus? It is like a key important one, but they kind of don't really focus on that one. It's always like a blind spot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a process actually. I think that a lot of the smaller businesses, new businesses, startups, they don't have any documented processes. So it's really hard to hold people accountable. So let's say like the monthly close process. For a lot of companies, it can take 20, 25 days to close their books. And then that means that you're already into October before you actually see August numbers. And it's all because they don't have a documented process. So whoever their boss is doesn't even know how to hold them accountable. Why is it taking you so many days? Well, this happened, that happened, and then their boss is like, well, okay, I don't know what this and that is, so I guess I have to accept that answer. But if you have a documented process, it shows you that on day one you should be doing this, day two, day three. In most of my companies, we had like a 5-day monthly close. Because everyone knew exactly what they were supposed to do in those 5 days, and then the numbers were done. So I think processes is probably the thing that I see most that people are lacking.
When we're talking about the top two ones, and we're slowly working towards the financial ones because that's the main one that's your strongest suit. When we talk about people, as a fractional CFO or as a CFO in a company, do you have a say in who should stay, who should get fired, who should get hired, and kind of fill some of those gaps for the strategic goals of the CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times that the person who hired us, they have their concerns and they're unsure. Is it the person? Is it the system? Am I, being too hard on them? I get a lot of softies, and they want me to do their dirty work. A lot of them, but yeah, I mean, I can learn a lot by I interview each of the people in their finance department. Ask about their background, what do they do, what are their frustrations, things like that. But I also we talk about just the numbers and go over what their thoughts are and why they're struggling and everything. You can gather a person's financial intelligence by just having a conversation with them. And then as you're going through the financials and bouncing questions off them, what was this one expense in September? Because it's not the same as the rest of the months. And, you get a response of, oh, I don't know, like that's my CEO. You got to talk to them. Like, and it's like, as you drill more questions at them, not even related to them, but just related to the numbers, if you're not getting the answers that you need, there's a weakness there. That doesn't mean fire them. It could mean that they're overwhelmed. Like you have to look at who's under them. What kind of support do they have? How long have they been with the company? How much are they brought into the business rather than just being called the number cruncher or whatever? So you got to look at everything around them too. You got to give them the opportunity to show that they can do the job. A lot of times you get people that were promoted up, which is great, but can the controller actually be the CFO? A lot of times they're lacking that strategic viewpoint or even the financial analytics viewpoint. I had a lot of data analysts who worked for me in the past. Data analyst is more of a bigger company thing. Smaller companies can't afford a data analyst. And I thought data analysts were going to, slice and dice the numbers many different ways and tell me lots of stories. But all they ever did was slice and dice the numbers. And then here, like, they never told me a story. And if you're not going to tell me a story, why are you there? Like, luckily, I'm a finance person. So when I was the CEO, I could see the story. But if you're a CEO without financial experience, you need that finance person to tell you what story do those numbers tell. But yes, the answer to your question, though, yes, I have gotten people fired and replaced, and we do actually help them find replacements, either within the company or outside the company.
I think the last piece that you mentioned was very interesting to me. That you mentioned that when I was a CEO, how does a CFO operate as a CEO? What are the things that you're doing that is merging both of those responsibilities into one?
Yeah, a lot of CEOs in the past, like when I was younger, a lot of CEOs came out of sales and marketing. Sales because you mentioned earlier, they're driving the revenue of the company. So it's an easy fit. You can see that. But if you're only focused on the top line, as a sales CEO, well, then you're missing the people, the process, the profit, and so you need a really strong CFO. Marketing, very similar. It depends on the product. If it's a very marketing product, then yeah, you become CEO. But more and more as I got older, I found a lot of CFOs were becoming the CEO because they had the profitability in mind. Am I a strong salesperson? Oh no, I'm not. I remember selling uh, Christmas cards door to door when I was a kid. Yes, I'm that old. And I hated it. I hated trying to sell things to people that I didn't think they needed. But salespeople, they'll sell it to people, that don't, ice cube to an Eskimo thing. And so they're very good at it. So you have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. So for me, yeah, when I became a CEO, it was from CFO to CEO. I didn't replace myself as CFO because I knew the numbers. So for me, it was an easy step up. I just had to make sure that I had the right sales and marketing, HR support to help me in my areas where I was weak.
Um, because we're going through your experiences specifically these things, I want to get down into the story of the 4 times that Tom got fired. Now, the first one, I believe, it started in Wall Street. How did that go?
Well, actually, the first time I was fired was from Burger King. I was working there. I was a kid. I was working there like 2 weeks, and I wanted to go on summer vacation. They were like, "You've only been here 2 weeks." I was like, "Well, I'm going anyway." So yeah, my fry job was not held for me when I got back, and that's the first explanation of my mouth. Um, Wall Street. I worked on Wall Street, and I actually didn't get fired for this one, but I was an analyst in their back office, and within like 3 months, they made me supervisor of the department, reporting to a manager and then to a director. And they gave the bonuses to the director for the department to divvy out. And I guess he took his portion, and he gave the manager his portion, and the staff got theirs. My bonus, mind you, I was only making $17,000 a year on Wall Street. My first job, my bonus was $1,000. And I'll make this clean for your audience, but I actually said to the director, "You should have bought me dinner first." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Before you bleeped me, you should have bought me dinner." And he actually did not fire me. I think because he knew he needed me. But I actually wound up, right after that, I became disgruntled and decided I was leaving and going back to grad school. So I didn't get fired for it, but their action of not appreciating me led to me leaving, and that's a learning experience in itself, for me.
When you're talking about Wall Street, there's a lot of, I think there was a lot of glorification until the Wolf of Wall Street movie came out and that whole biography. What people are mentioning, is that kind of what you saw as well, working on Wall Street, or is just like a little bit of over glamorizing that, or it was a little bit more blown out of proportion to sell a book?
No, that's what I saw. Yeah. Like I said, my family was in Wall Street, and I saw that through them. And you could make so much money there, and it's like when actors become famous or singers become famous at a young age. It's just, wow, I have all this money and what to do with it, and people are offering you things, and it's drugs and alcohol and women, and it's just, yeah, no, it was not an over exaggeration of it, and it was the 80s, so it was different back then. I think the crash is what woke a lot of people up, and that's only the people who woke up during that time period. It doesn't mean that it hasn't reinvented itself in different ways today, and there are a lot of new people going through the same thing, and not only on Wall Street, like I said, in the entertainment industry as well. I never experienced that, making my 17,000 a year. I did not go the trading and the salesman route. That's where the money is. I thought about it, but about moving into that area, but it just wasn't me. It doesn't fit my personality. It's almost, I call it a boys club. I mean, there's a lot of women in it today, but back then there weren't as many. But it's just a hoorah, men watching a football game type of personality mentality that I saw. and it just wasn't me. And also, I didn't feel at the time that I was using my brain as much and being creative as well in those positions. Now, I know, like my brother, for example, he worked in option derivatives, absolutely used his brain. He was a Wharton grad student, he was very smart. And so, yes, he used his brain. But a lot of the people I just felt were basically being told what to do. They did it, they made a lot of money.
That's all. Trade this, trade this. Sure, no problem. Now,
Yeah, great for them. Yeah.
in the second job, you noticed something that the CEO was doing that was not very, very good.
Yeah, I noticed that in a lot of jobs. So let's say, all right. So the next one I got fired from was a distribution company. I won't mention names. A distribution company, and it was a family-owned company. It was taken over by a private equity company. Private equity company brought me in to be their CFO, and that was when I left a large multinational to go become a CFO. And I was working there a couple of years, and they decided to change the CEO. And the new CEO who came in, this is hard. When you don't respect your direct boss. Now I reported to him, and I reported to the CFO of the private equity firm, who I had a high respect for, but I didn't respect my CEO, and that's something, again, as a young person at the time, I had to figure out how to handle that. I didn't handle it well. Since I didn't respect him, and the reason I didn't respect him is his decisions, his drinking in the office, stuff like that. And so I remember one time we were in a meeting, and he said no phones in the meeting, and my phone rang. I didn't even know I had it on, and I took the call, and he got very mad and asked for for me to be fired. And I wouldn't have thought that the private equity firm would have went through with it, but it was right after September 11th, 9/11, and the head of the private equity firm asked me to lie to the vendors of why we weren't paying them and telling them it was 9/11 related, and I refused. And it's because my morals kicked in. It's something that's always I've had an issue with, and I lost a few people in 9/11, and I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't lie about something that horrendous and use it to my advantage. And he called me, when he let me go, he called me not a team player. And I said, well, if that's what it takes to be on the team, then I'm fine leaving, and I left.
It's interesting to see the situation that a CFO might be put, which has nothing to do with the numbers. We're talking about a situation where the numbers have to be muddied like dramatically, and to use a tragedy as that's what we couldn't pay vendors. When we're going to the next position, do you start to notice a pattern, or you start to develop better skills to handle these situations? How did the second one go?
It's interesting. I didn't notice a pattern until I got to my job in the healthcare business. When I worked for that large multinational, I was there for 7 years, and I was at a dinner. It was a company function, a lot of people, and I was at a big round table with like 8 people, and there was a salesman. And in my experience, at least at this company, salesmen were very bold and vocal and loud, and because that's their personalities, and it does well for them. And he was a married guy, and he was hitting on a married woman next to me, and she was getting very uncomfortable, and she was like, asking me to walk with her to the bathroom and stuff like that. And I happened to be in the bathroom washing my hands when this gentleman walked up next to me in the sink, and I just said to him, I just want to let you know that you're making her very uncomfortable, and that's all I said, But obviously at the time I was 25 or whatever, 26, and I didn't know the pecking order. I didn't know there was a pecking order. All I was doing was being a decent human being. And that was the end of it, right? The next day, the controller of this large company called me into his office and said, you need to go and apologize to this guy. And I said, apologize for what? And he said, you made him very uncomfortable, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I'm not apologizing. And he said, well, then you'll be let go. And I was like, and that's when I realized, Tom, put your big boy pants on, suck it up. This is business. This is what you have to do. So I went in there, and being me, I said, I apologize if you felt bad about what I said. Not apologize for what I did, but if you felt bad. And that's the strategy that I've seen a lot on people on TV today. I was just like, that's not an apology. But I did what I had to do. I hated myself for it. I honestly did. I hated myself that I gave in and did something against my character when I felt like I didn't do anything wrong. But I was young and I needed the job, and it's something that and it's something I taught my kids too. When I learned that, is sometimes you just have to save face or whatever, and you need to suck it up. Is basically it. The job that you're talking about, I was only there for like 3 months. I was CFO of a company, and as part of that CFO's responsibilities, which is often the case, you had to review the T&E expenses of the CEO. I mean, because somebody had to, right? Because like the CEO reviews everyone else's. I noticed very quickly that there were some weird things in his T&E reports, travel entertainment expense reports. And I would see the same flight twice, and I'd go to him and I'd be like, oh, was this a mistake? Did you enter it like here and then you forgot? And he's like, yeah, that's just a mistake, whatever. And then they had to tag fixed assets. And so there would be a painting or a piece of jewelry. And as part of my due diligence, I'd be like, oh, where is that painting? Is it in the hallway or whatever? And he's like, oh, that was a personal item. I forgot to like flag that as personal. And I was like, my spidey sense went up. And I was like, okay, so something's going on here. I started looking a little deeper and finding things, and I stopped going to him and finding things, and I realized that there was something amiss. There was jewelry bought that he claimed was gifts for the sales team, all male sales team. And I checked into the flights, and the reason the flight was submitted twice is because it was two different seats sitting next to each other. It was him, and it turned out his girlfriend. He was married with 5 kids, but it turned out it was him and his girlfriend. So I went to the parent company, who I reported to as well, the CFO there, and said, I found some things. I really liked him, the CEO. I don't know what to do. I talked to my uncle, who was on Wall Street first, and I said, what should I do? He's like, well, you can get in trouble. He's like, if it's found out and found out that you knew, you can get in trouble as well. And he had a situation he told me about where, something similar happened to him. So I decided to say something, and they said, well, we want you to investigate and see how much you can find. So I found $300,000 that he had taken from the company over however long he had been there. And I found out that 4 CFOs had been hired and fired from the same position within the last 2 years. So I don't know if they found it or whatever, but it was weird. So I reported this to them. I come in the next day, there were police there. He had been taken away and arrested. And it was just, again, I was still relatively young at the time. It was just a shocker for me. Funny thing is I was fired a month later for no cause. You don't have to give cause. They gave me a severance package and everything like that. And I was like, all I can think of is that during my investigation, I found things the parent company wasn't doing on the up and up either. But there's no way I was going after a Swiss-owned company. I don't know their stock market or laws or anything like that. So they were safe with me. But anyway, they got rid of me anyway. And then after that, I went to a company where I wound up spending 20 years. And after 6 months, I found out their CEO was not stealing for his own pocket. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. So he was lose money on a deal and then tell the board that it broke even by taking the upfront payment from the next deal and applying it to that deal. So he never wanted to admit failure. He never wanted to admit that they weren't doing well. But when I was reviewing the numbers, they were losing $1.1 million that they didn't know about. And with this company, it was directly out of their pockets. It wasn't shareholders or anything like that. It was a private company. So what I just experienced with the last one, being arrested and me being fired, it made me think, now what do I do? Like, I don't want to be fired again. I kind of like the CEO again as well. So this time I had to be sneakier. And so I was out to dinner with two of the board members because they asked me to go out to dinner because I think that I can't hide much of my facial expressions. So during board meetings, when things would come up, I just, like, and they noticed it and they asked me to go to dinner and they said, tell me what's going on. And I said, I can't. I report to him. You have questions you need to ask him. And they said, well, we're the board. You report to us too. And we're the owners of the company. I said, yes, but I've been through this before and I want to go through the proper channels. And so I said, look, ask questions. And they said, what type of questions? And I said, ask these types of questions at the board meeting and I'll be forced to answer them in front of him. And if he answers them for me, which he does a lot, then you need to say, Tom, show me the numbers or whatever. And I'll be forced to. Well, that happened. I was forced to. It still got dirty. He and the president of the board decided to try and throw me under the bus. I've only been there 6 months. How much could I do? And I, again, hate to admit this, had to get sneaky because they were being sneaky. So I listened at the door during the board meeting when I wasn't in the board meeting, when they were talking about me, and heard some things that they were saying untrue. And so as soon as I came in, I had a defense. I knew what they were going to accuse me of. I had the numbers. I had the proof. And so it was a slam dunk when I got in there. And they fired him, on the spot. And they asked me to be temporary CEO until they found someone. And I said, no, I won't be temporary CEO. I'll be permanent CEO, but I won't be temporary CEO. I think it was not sure what I can say, but a gutsy. I think it was a gutsy move on my part, being fired so much. But it worked out. They said yes. I think they knew at that point that they could trust me. And I think also they knew they could fire me at any point. So why not give me a chance? It wasn't like I signed a contract or anything like that. So they gave me a chance and I spent 20 years there, in the end. And I think I learned, I remember that I got into an argument with one of the board members. And I remember I was giving what I got. And he said to me, remember I own this company and that you report to me. And in that moment, I realized, he's right. Man to man, human to human, I was like, no one's above anyone. But, in this company, you are my boss. One of like 30, but you are my boss. And I do need to be respectful of that. And even if I disagree, I need to come at it from a respectful way. And I think when I was younger, I didn't realize that. It's not always in what you say, it's in how you say it. And I think it took maturity, coming from the Jersey City streets of New Jersey. Yes, I did have a mouth and no filter, but I think with maturity comes a realization that, you can have that fire inside you, but in business, you need to speak in a respectable tone, even in disagreement. And so it is something I did learn, luckily, as I got older.
At the end of the journey, there was at least that conclusion that now you're taking, and you're applying this as a fractional CFO. So after that last one for 20 years, sold, exited, and you decided to go for fractional CFO. What made you go for fractional?
It's I always say it's not often you get off the hamster wheel. You enter in America, you get on the hamster wheel out of college, and unless you're fired, you don't get off that hamster wheel. You just keep going, and then you get married and have kids and and a house, and you have responsibilities, financial responsibilities, and you're not allowed to take breaks like some other countries are. And so when I lost the job, after I sold Coastal, I went and I worked for the company that bought them. And when I left that company, I had a year non-compete. So I couldn't even work in healthcare. And that's where my last 20 years were. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to take this year and breathe, and take the opportunity to do things that I want to do, act, write a book, start my own business, look at ideas. And, I took that opportunity. And it's funny because Gershon from the Fractional CFO company had contacted me as soon as I left that company. And I said, well, I have a non-compete. And he's like, well, we have non-healthcare companies. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I also want to breathe. I want to take this opportunity. Financially, I was finally at a point where I could. And so I said, check back with me in a year. And he must have taken a note somewhere because he did. So I had my fun. I did the things that I wanted to do during that year. And when he contacted me again, I said, you know what? All right, I'm ready to get back on the hamster wheel, but at a slow speed. I don't want to go back working 9 to 5. COVID definitely affected me as far as, working from home, not going into an office every day. Uh, um, I work better without interruptions, and so I also found that a way of being able to continue living the life that I was living, but dipping my toe back in, one client at a time. And now I have 3 or 4 clients. I can't even remember what the day of the week is. But it was dipping my toe back in. But I also enjoyed the fact that I was helping companies. So all this experience that I had, I could put to use. It's kind of like charity, but you're being paid for it. And I like being paid. So I was helping others, but also I'm good at it. I'm good at that financial detective work of finding out what isn't working with you. And so I enjoy it. I enjoy digging in. I enjoy finding out. I enjoy actually working with new people each month. I used to do consulting back in the day, and I enjoyed hopping from company to company and helping them out and then leaving, and going on to help another company. And it's what they take from it after you leave. That's up to them. You give them all this advice, you point them in the right direction, and you leave, and they could go back to their old habits, and hopefully call me up again. But, you can't control what's after that. But it's the same thing in regular business. After you leave a company, you can't control what they do. And also, when you work for smaller companies like I have and huge conglomerates like I have, you see the differences in the red tape, in the structure, lack of structure, and it's a lot. You can take all that big business learning to the smaller companies, and institute things that they wouldn't even think to institute because they're a smaller company and they don't have the staff, but they're also not stepping over each other like at the big companies as well. So I actually enjoy doing the fractional CFO work.
You're you're able to take more of the experience that you did throughout life and apply for the smaller guys because you can see how your impact is fast. They can implement the strategies they have, the structure they have, and because there's a variety, there's not like one person that you need to like butt heads. You can just say thank you so much and move to the next one. Then whatever you gave them as advice, it's up to them to see what they want to do with it, and it balanced it out where it's rewarding without the burden that I have to do it, that this person wants me to do it if we don't kind of align on a personal level. That's
Well,
it.
I haven't had the issue with the aligning on the personal level as I've matured. But you also, as a fractional CFO, you don't really have a boss. Like, you're kind of your own boss. Like, you have a client. And I feel like it's different when you have a client versus a boss. Like, a client, your job is to please the client. Like, not please the client in like, tell them what they want to hear, because that's not a fractional CFO's job. But it is like, if they don't understand what you're saying, you need to switch up. You need to switch up the way you're talking, to help them to understand. That's your job. So that's something that was that I learned as a fractional CFO. And I probably should have, in my history said, my boss is my client, because that really is true. Your boss is your client, and all the people that you work with, your peers, everyone is your client in the end. You work in a huge conglomerate where there's a lot of backstabbing, and so sometimes you fear your peers, and sometimes you don't trust your peers because there's one job that's for the promotion, and you're all fighting for it, and so there is a lot of backstabbing. But if you treat them all as your clients, which I've learned, everyone has their own drivers. Not everyone wants that position. Some people want other things out of life. They want balance, they want money, they want the promotion, they want gratitude. So I think that I've learned over time that everyone has their own drivers, and it's about finding out what their particular drivers are, and that's how you can please them.
Right. And when we're down this path of reflection, you understand that some of the stuff people have their own drivers. That's what you need to kind of treat them as clients. What are some of the other things that you learned that you want to share with other CFOs or other CEOs about the falls and how to get back and continue?
Yeah, I think that I mentioned earlier KPIs, key performance indicators, and I think that that is just an example of things that are lacking in a lot of companies that are struggling, and that is data, that is information. It's not always numbers, sometimes it's just facts of what's going on, because as a CEO, especially in smaller companies, you don't have, and we do smaller to medium-sized companies, but you don't have the staff that you have in the larger companies, even though that can hurt you, as having too much staff can hurt you as well. But, like I have a client right now who, is a 10 to $20 million business, and he still does all the accounts payable. He pays all the bills. He doesn't know what bills are due. They come into like his email, all his bills, and he pays them by going through all of them. Now that's a lot. He doesn't even have them into a system like QuickBooks where you could say what are 30 days, 60 days, 90 days due, and then he also is doing the HR, the legal, the IT, implementation, everything. His staff, because it's retail, his staff is all retail staff. So he has no back office whatsoever. Now, as a fractional CFO, we're not supposed to go in there and do your task. We're not supposed to go in there and pay your bills, collect your receivables, do your financial reporting, like your bookkeeping, your reconciliations. We're supposed to tell you how to do it better. And if you need staff, we'll help you find the staff to do it. So I did, like, for example, with him, have to find him a better bookkeeper, because his bookkeeper, number one, was expensive, and number two, was not providing him data. The bookkeeper was a good talker, and that, I think, put the wool over his eyes, kind of like, oh, he tells me good things and everything like that. But the financials were a mess, and they didn't tell a story at all. And so it was, once I got the data in front of him, this is really interesting, because once I dug through the data and got the data in front of him, I showed him that, and this is why I particularly won't use names, he spent $400,000 in the last year developing a website, one website. Now that, normally an expensive one, is like $30,000 to $50,000. Like that's like an Amazon level expensive website. Rather than telling him, I asked him, how much do you think you spent on your website? He said, oh, I know. It's like $100,000. I said, no, it's $400,000. He hit the floor. He was flabbergasted. That's an example of the lack of transparency in his data. Like, it was just incredible. That wasn't the only thing I found there, and that is an extreme example. But, you talk to companies about their marketing budget, or most of them don't even have budgets. Their lack of a budget is first and foremost. But how much you're spending in marketing, and the question you ask them is, what's your return on that investment? And they have no idea. And I understand, it's not something, they're trying to run a company, and they're thinking, I got to get my name out there, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, but there are many avenues you could take with marketing, and you need to actually measure your success to know whether you're going the right route or you're just throwing money away, and that's marketing. That's sales. You look at the commission they're paying salespeople. A lot of companies are paying salespeople salary plus commission. Okay. You have 5 people in sales making the same and salary. Now, what is your sales by salesman? I don't know. Okay, so now you look at your sales by salesman and you see that one is just living off the salary, doesn't care that they're not making a commission because the salary is pretty high, but they don't know this because they don't have the data. So it's really going through and getting them all the data that is driving their business but hurting their financials. So that's why I say key performance indicators. It's really important that you have discussions with the owners or whoever's hiring you to know what drives the business, and getting that data in front of them on a regular basis.
It's very interesting because I think also as you scale and as you grow, you have to have the right people to point you and guide you in the right direction, because it does get too complicated for one person to oversee everything and to do those nitty gritty. If you have the right person that is there, sometimes it can be tricky. How do you know if they're telling you the truth? How did you stop and you check those things on your own? These are, I would say, like tough situations, because you don't want to also, in that particular case, let's say, would he destroy the relationship with the bookkeeper if he asked tougher questions to get the data?
I think that in this case, he didn't know the questions to ask. And that's the problem. The financials were so convoluted. They were a mixture between accrual accounting and cash accounting. And so they didn't even make sense. And so he didn't even know what questions to ask. And I will tell you that I struggled, for a long time, trying to understand the financials because it didn't make sense. I had to drill down. They were using QuickBooks. Drill down, keep drilling down. Every time you could press a blue number that would drill down, I had to keep drilling down into the journal entries to understand what was going on. And as I asked more and more questions of the bookkeeper, why'd you do this? What is this? His response was always, I've asked him and I can't get a straight answer. He's talking about the owner of what that expense is. Well, okay, well, let's ask him together, and we ask him together, and I'm just like, again, it sends a spidey sense up that something isn't right here. And, you can't get rid of the owner. So you got to get rid of the bookkeeper.
Amazing. If someone likes your sense of humor and likes what they hear, how do people get a hold of you to work with you?
Well, we're Imperial Group. So I think it's imperialgrp.com. As I said, I'm not a good salesperson, so. But yeah, or just look me up on LinkedIn. I'm on there.
Fantastic.
I'm on all the socials. Don't look at the other ones though.
Don't look at the other one. Just go on LinkedIn, find Tom, and
that's my acting life.
I appreciate you taking the time and tell us all these things, because I think you're showing the human component in what a CFO would do, or how these massive organizations work. That it does get dirty sometimes. The 47 laws of power can be applied in real life, and they do sometimes work. And that it's at the end of the day, if you do what your moral compass says, you end up in a fantastic place like you are. You went through all those places, and you're now, doing fractional CFO, doing acting, the stuff that you're doing, and it's always staying true to your values, to your course. It will all work out fine at the end of the day. So I appreciate you taking the time, walking us through all those stories, and I wish you all the success with the fractional CFO stuff.
Thanks. The last I would say is that, through all the ups and downs I've had in my career, I've always been a really hard worker. My work ethic, I think, has gotten me through. And so I think that is what people notice beyond the sometimes fiery personality and the humor and everything like that. People see that I am a hard worker, and I do have that analytical brain that they like. And so I think that has balanced me out. But I will say, for the people that may not have that balance, maybe tame that filter a little earlier than I did.
Absolutely.
But
Tom,
keep the humor.
keep the humor. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.